without further ado, I invite the Prime Minister to open up the debate. Here.
Okay. POIs in the chat, please. And can I ask whoever still has their microphone on to turn it off? It was a bit loud. Okay. Three, two, one, go. When we say we regret the focus on personal identity and actions, what we mean is things this person has done outside of their political office, things this person has said in their private time, things this person has done in the past, maybe even as far back as 20 years ago, right? This could look like this person having a sex scandal, this person having made racist remarks in the past, but it can also be kind of on the positive side of the coin. It can be being rich, having built a media empire, having like made yourself known as someone who is a wealthy person. So what problems do we see with this? In my speech, I will go through, first of all, who manages to have like a clean kind of track record and who does this keep out? Secondly, why this is a way that we miss out on good politicians, which is obviously necessary. And thirdly, how this shifts the conversation and furthers polarization and makes important policies less likely. So let's talk through this, right? First of all, who manages to have like a clean track record and is able to portray themselves like personally positive? Probably not someone who is coming from a poor background. Probably not someone who has had some minor crimes in their past, right? Probably someone who has come from already a rich family, someone like Trump, someone like Berlusconi, who is able to portray themselves positively through their own media imperium that they have built and show that they are like a successful, great overall person. So we think that this like gives an advantage to already privileged people who are able to show that their personality is so great and they are such a great person overall, right? But why is it important? Why is it important to have like a good leader or someone who is as qualified for politics as possible, right? We do agree that probably whether you have been involved in some sex scandals or whether you were able to amount to some wealth does have some influence, but it's absolutely not the most important thing on whether you're going to be a good politician, whether you have diplomatic skills, whether you have like political skills whatsoever, whether you're able to pass policies, whether you're able to talk well with foreign leaders, right? It's not the most important. It's not the most important focus, and this is what we've seen. Like, unfortunately, this is the trend that we've seen, and we think that in the world where this wouldn't have happened, we would have seen more focus on meritocratic issues. We would have seen that people would value that this person has built a political career, this person has had some diplomatic achievements, this person in the political world has done something well, right? This is how they would have to show that they are a good politician, and we think that this would lead to better outcomes, right? Because first of all, obviously, it's much more linked to the actual job they're supposed to be doing afterwards, right? Like if you think about a corporation, you would never think that, you know, people should be going up the corporate ladder because they are able to have to show themselves to be good people or to be good in the media, right? You always look at the meritocracy because for the whole system to function as good as possible, you want people to be going up the ladder who are just doing best at what they're doing best, right? But then, you're basically missing out on the best politicians you can have. You're also missing out on people like, for example, Buttigieg, who is openly gay, and thus people perceive him as being probably unelectable because of this reason, and that's why they're not pushing for it. Like reasons that could be completely irrelevant if people would focus less on these kind of personal issues and would think less of a leader as just like a person that is heading the country. Because note, if opposition side tries to claim that the most important quality of a leader is to just represent their country, right? This doesn't stand, because most world leaders actually have a huge amount of decision power politically, right? Note that Trump could probably just like press on a button and like nuke North Korea, right? It's not that he's just like a representative of the state and there's like some decision makers behind him in the background. You are giving actual political power to people. So we do regret that people don't think this is the most important thing that people should be elected upon. I'll take closing now, yes. So closing opposition, please.
All other things, policy, etc., being equal, would you prefer to vote for someone who had a history of committing sexual assault or someone who didn't?
So I think that obviously if all else was the same, I would look out for the person who has not committed the sexual assault. But this is probably not what's going to be happening in this case. This is like the fact that the focus is so large is that these things are being weighed against each other, not as an additional criteria after we have like regarded their political achievements. It's not like we're looking at two persons, then we like first address their political achievements, and only if these are exactly equal, then we look at their personal achievements. These things are equalized in like conversations and are being said, no, but I don't know, we can't elect Biden because he has had some like sexual harassment history, right? Even though this is probably not the most important factor, like towards him being a good leader, right? Or towards him getting the policies that we need. Okay, so what does this do? It shifts the conversation. It puts the idea away of we are electing a person that is supposed to fulfill a political role, that is supposed to like put forward policy, but this is a person who you should love or you should hate, right? And what does this do? It fuels direct polarization, because once you don't identify with someone on like a kind of more abstract policy level, once you don't say, well, I would vote for this guy because he was putting this policy forward, or this lady who was putting this policy forward, you're saying, no, I can't elect this person. I hate them as a person. They have done these terrible things before. This is something that is much deeper seated and much more personal to people. And this is the thing that fuels hate, where you don't just disagree with someone's opinion, but you actually actively think negatively of people who are voting for the other person, because you think they must also be sexist, they must also be racist. I cannot have a conversation with them whatsoever, right? And this is what's important, right? Because many positive policies that need to be passed, and that should be passed in a timely manner, need bipartisan support to be able to be passed. And as soon as you have like more and more polarization where it's just unacceptable to agree on the other person's side because of like deep-rooted personal issues, these kind of policies that are necessary that probably both sides would agree to are just not being passed, right? So what you have to understand is that the state is not that much different than a corporation. We need competent leaders who have proven their competency in politics and not by showing themselves off on TV, right? We need like better policies for people. So vote OG.
Cool. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for her speech, and would now like to invite the leader of the opposition to deliver their speech. Hear, hear.
Cool. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Honorable panel, two things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to explain why personal identity and private action are representative of potential political performance of politicians in the future. Second of all, I'm going to explain why identity politics are going to die then, and why it's an absolutely awful thing to happen. For that, a few points of extraneous rebuttal. So what basically OG is talking about? They say, you know, only rich people get the clean record, and they give examples of Trump and Berlusconi. Oh my God, these people have a clean record, and that's absolutely true. But really, we believe there are systematic reasons as to why that's not the case, right? Because A, we believe rich people are by far more likely to have eyes on them at all the wrong times, which makes by far more likely that they have a record of their past wrongdoings, like those poor people that they care about so much, and therefore they're by far less likely to get away whatever stuff that they have done, but B, because they're just systematically in a position of power, they have ability to curse other people. The culture around them is usually forcing them, well, not forcing, but teaching them to curse other people, which means that their behavior systematically changes to be likely to do so. There's no real analysis as to why poor people or like disadvantaged people do systematically do harm to other people to the extent as rich people do. We believe they don't because they're reasonable. If a few people of them do, we believe we have a ton of other examples that don't do this harm, and so we don't believe that this is really a comparative damage, right? Second thing, they say political record is the most representative thing. It would be great if we would care only about, right? With A, politicians change political positioning all the time. Biden was for Iraq war, for segregation, etc. Now he's the most liberal person. If you listen to him, Trump literally changed his party affiliations 3 times. We don't believe politicians' past record is super representative of whatever policies they're going to be defending right now, but also believe that there's very little expectations for politicians to totally follow up on their promise. People are just disillusioned and just distrust politicians to follow up on their promise. So when they don't do that, it's just seen as not so much of a big deal. It's something that is just expected, and everyone's like, very sad, but we don't care as much, right? Last thing that they say, if everyone would care about policy a lot, we would get better decision making, etc. Believe that it's not true and it's not comparative. How? Because we believe most people don't care about policy briefs because they are A, very boring, B, because they're hard to understand. You don't know about economic policy, you don't know about foreign policy. Most people just don't know anything about this stuff. Very hard for them to actually evaluate what is good, what is bad, etc. But generally, people get less engagement with those policies in case if that's the only way for you to have engagement. And so we have more political apathy and more people voting across party lines instead of trying to at least somehow analyze the character of people who are they're voting for. But even for those people that try to do so, they don't do a super high quality analysis. And so it's unlikely that we get some great examples as Olja is talking about. So basically that's a problem. Now, into our case, right? First of all, let's talk about representation, why personal identity is a good thing, right? To explain why people are going to perform good or bad, right? We believe that it's very likely that what you are going to do as a president, prime minister, or like governor is dependent on your personality. Why? 3 key reasons, right? A, people don't become politicians and eventually change as people, right? They still remain human, still have a lot of past experiences that they have absolutely shaped their actions in the past and shaped the way how they look at the world. At the moment, they are a politician for a short period of time, but the period of time that they have done before in their life is probably something that created a lot of ideas inside of their head that they cannot just, get out of it, right? It's a frame through which you see the world, right? Epistemically, we believe that as a white person, you cannot understand the struggle of black people just because it's impossible for you to see what kind of struggles they've seen. As a rich person, you cannot really understand the struggles that poor people see. Yes, you might have some empathy and be like, oh, it's sad that people are poor, but you cannot really understand what are underlying deep mechanisms that systematically put the poor down, because it's just not a situation in which you have ever been or been forced to be thinking about, right? B, because they have a ton of connection networks that dictate what? A, first of all, the choice of their advisors, political advisors that are going to briefing them on their future policy. B, choice of people who are they going to choose as lobbyists, who are going to give them money for campaigning and therefore be able to dictate their policy later on. C, just people who are they going to go to during a hard time and talk with as a friend and have some personal conversations, which are also going to then later on change what kind of decisions they're going to. Last thing is, what is important is that these politicians, despite having some checks and balances, still almost always hold a ton of personal power, right? In presidential systems such as US or France, presidents have a lot of power, but even like in systems such as Britain, or where you have like party systems, party leaders still have a ton of coercive power over their party policies, party politics, and etc. Look at Corbyn, who made Labour Party to be very socialist, despite almost everyone in his party hating this stuff just because he had a lot of popular support. It's very likely that this personal imagery is going to showcase what kind of policies people are going to. So imagine then on an example, right? McKinsey manager who likely screwed over poor people and have held corporate for 40 years is likely to continue doing that because that's all he knows, and that is something that he self-justified to himself while doing that, right? Grabber by the pussy is likely to be a misogynist asshole who's going to stomp on women's rights. Look at US at the moment. Very likely for these things to be very problematic, right? What is unique about these things is that this personal character is uniquely the thing that helps us to access information that's not written and positioned on deliberate and strategic choices that politicians do when they create their policy briefs, their platforms, and etc., but actually see who these people are as people, and therefore see what is written between the lines and have a fair assessment of what they're going to behind closed doors. And these things are extremely important for people to know in order to make good political decisions. Now, secondly, on identity politics, look, they talk about Pete Buttigieg. No one would give a fuck about Pete Buttigieg if he wasn't gay, because he's like literally a mayor of a small city like Indiana. No one gives a fuck about that city, right? Only reason why people vote for him at least a little bit is because he's gay, right? Now, why it's important? Because people who make decisions about politicians on base of like different factors such as money that they can raise for campaigning, their past track record as politicians on high level positions, support that they may get from powerful media actors controlled by white Christian corporate like people, they're all probably going to be the factors that are going to be main in deciding the world in case of opening government, right? Why it's problematic? Because disadvantaged groups, disadvantage comes exactly from the fact that they're deprived of ability to have all of this kind of support. Only things that help disadvantaged groups to somehow advance through politics is their identities. The fact that they can say, hey, I'm black, I'm going to representing you and black public, and therefore you should vote for me because I do understand your struggle, I understand your problem. And this is important because that's true, right? There's only people, as I've already explained, are capable to do these things amazingly, right? And identity politics is a huge deal because it uniquely helps these groups to do two things, right? First of all, kickstart careers of politicians that would have been nobody, such as, say, AOC, who would have been a nobody unless she was a woman of color, that would have a very, very good identity so that people would support her and her progressive policies, be like overcome like big gaps when you have high level elections such as with Obama, who made his ability to swing the vote because a lot of black voters voted him particularly. All of those things are great, very proud to post.
Cool. I would like to thank the leader of the opposition for his speech. I would now like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to deliver their speech. Hear, hear.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, we think that that opening opposition would be right if the way that the portrayal of these personal factors in the media would occur would in fact be a realistic representation of someone's track record. However, they entirely ignore the nuance of our case. That this is not just about someone's track record as it is, but rather about the way this person manages to frame that track record. For that reason, I'm going to do very little direct rebuttal to the leader of opposition, because I think that all of their points about that we care about having nice people in office do not stand if they cannot prove that the people that are generally perceived positively are actually the people who have a positive personality. We think that there was no response whatsoever against our mechanism, why often people manage to frame, when they are from a privileged background, their own backstory in a way that is much more positive than it deserves to be, and why therefore this realistic representation that relies on isn't like doesn't hold in reality. So I'm going to talk about what kind of people are very unlikely to be elected, if this is an important part, then about what kind of people are likely to be elected, and then why the second type of people is worse. And that was quite easy. Before that, one point of rebuttal and then the counterfactual. So I think on their point about so they claim that it is very important that or the types of personality are very important for how someone acts in office. However, we think there are many types of personal identity or aspects of our personal identity that we talked about that are absolutely irrelevant to how good someone performs in office, right? Whether you are gay or straight, we don't think opening opposition has given us any reason to believe why that would be important. Then on their point of identity politics, because I think this is hugely problematic. We really don't believe that people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like Obama, were elected because they were people of ethnic minorities. We think they were elected and got so popular because they were fucking great politicians with fucking great ideas, who were great in debates, and who people felt they could trust for a brighter future for America. We think, therefore, that it's very, very problematic to claim that the only reason these people got got so successful was because of their personal background. Even if we buy that some people who are from minorities might be more attracted to voting for our people who are also from that same personal background, we think they entirely forget that this group is always a minority, right? So even if you might get some exposure for Pete Buttigieg, this means they can still, he could still never be elected for president in the US, where being gay is still being seen as something that is out of the norm by the majority of the population. So then also we don't see why it's important that these people might get some exposure if they can't in the end capitalize it in terms of actually being successful. So we think this entire point about identity politics falls entirely outside of this debate, right? So on the counterfactual a bit. So opening opposition, yeah, says, yeah, on the counterfactual, people wouldn't read these things at all because the policies at all because they are extremely boring. Note, people do need some reason to vote. In the status quo, they can very easily just vote for a person that they have a good feeling with, while saving themselves any effort to look into the actual policies. This is no longer possible under the counterfactual. We think, therefore, that people will be forced to at least look at some debate. Even if people are going to vote along party lines, as opening opposition says, you do need some reason to prefer one party over another. If this is not the personality of the person representing this party, it has to be somehow policy related. And they say, but this doesn't say anything because people always change their policies. Sure, this happens sometimes, but we think it's quite fair to say that when you vote for a Democrat, you know that you're going to expect probably a bit more of social redistribution than you vote for a Republican. There are some core issues inherent to politicians' campaigns that they can't change. So we think this only goes for relatively minor issues. I think this destroys everything from opening opposition. Right, to our own case then. So what kind of people will this empower, and what kind will it empower? So we think that it will empower people who have a very positive, who are very enfranchised to begin with, because these are the people who, even if they have a negative track record objectively, will be able, through their media ties, through their history of personal successes, able to reframe this as something positive, or to redirect attention from any negative any negative things that happened in their past. So yes, we agree that people like Trump and Berlusconi have terrible track records when you look at them objectively. Still, they got elected. That is our entire point. This shows that the reason they got elected was not because their track records personally were so great in and of themselves, but rather that because of their past, because Trump had spent so much money for decades in building a personal image, going onto The Apprentice, presenting himself everywhere as a successful person. He was capable to, through all the money he had spent in that, to outdo the negative image that might also be a part of him. We think this exactly shows that you need mostly just this past of influence in the media to be successful, and not a positive track record as is. We think that is very harmful, because we think the kind of people who have spent a lot of their lives actually building a positive image for themselves are unlikely to be the kinds of people who care really about society, because if they would probably have started doing something social, like use their money to do something that contributes to society, rather than just trying to create a personality quotas. So we think that the example of Trump exactly goes into our side of that. Also note, this is independent of general advantage of being rich in campaigning, because I can imagine opposition saying, okay, Trump already has an advantage because he's rich, but note, he now has an extra advantage, because in most countries the different parties have roughly equal resources for campaigning anyway. What this does uniquely is go deeply into the past and privilege those people who for decades have been enfranchised. We think this is bad. We think also, because of the same reason, it's very unlikely for people who have had a disprivileged background and therefore have needed all those decades to actually climb up and have not been able to put resources into image building, are much less likely to be elected under our side of the house. And we think this is harmful exactly for the reasons that OO mentions, namely that if you have personal acquaintance with being disenfranchised, you're much more likely to actually implement policies that help that. So we think in the end, what we get is politicians who probably don't care as much for the disenfranchised, who need representation the most. Also, no response to the polarization point. Please vote open.
All right, cool. I would like to thank Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. I would now like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to deliver their speech. Here.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
All right. So all things are fundamentally uncertain predictors of the future actions of a politician. Policy records, past employment, the education that a person has are very unreliable. You can lie, you can adapt, you can change your priorities, and you can go back on your promises. The key question in this debate is whether or not, when voters are making that decision, a focus on they should focus at least to a significant extent on that person's identity. This focus isn't the only thing that matters, but it should be a significant reason for voting for someone. And we give two reasons for that. Firstly, because identity and private actions are important predictors of the kind of personality that a person occupies. And secondly, absence of focus on that means that the disadvantaged people in the status feature get screwed. So beginning with refutation, it's very sad how OG doesn't engage at all with the first point that we brought in this debate. To the extent to which Mukhtar already proved to you why it's likely that the person identities influences how they are going to operate. And if I care as a voter about how the politicians will operate, which is presumably something we should care about in, and it is an inherent right that exists within people, and that identity is an important part of voting for that, irrespective of the kind of benefits that they get on their side of the house. We already won this debate because we proved to you why you get better representation of the people on our side of the house, because you get better approximation of the voters' choice. But let's try even with that to engage. The very shallow response that we get from opening government is that how they are framed in the media, and because rich people are framed in the media in a better way, this our entire case somehow falls. This is very shallow response for two reasons. Firstly, it is largely uncomparative. It's their claim is that because personal focus on personal identity richer people, and that private life of richer people gets better narrative in the media. This is extremely uncomparative because people's track records can also be framed in a better way. Look at Republicans. Somehow they managed to prove to rural poor white Americans that it is good to cut Social Security. One politician with power, even if a politician has a good and the competitor with power can outsmart him and spend tons of money on advertising to show that Medicare for all is somehow a socialist project. We think that because policy is complex, track records are complex, there are different variations and shades of gray as to what is something good, and any kind of policy can be framed in a better or a good way. You still have the kind of advantages opening government talks about in their counterfactual. You don't have, you have zero change on their side of the house, so that's why they lose. But there's also second response that I'm going to give, which will kind of benefit our case to some extent. Opening government thinks that there are no incentives to uncover what rich people do because they have power and because they have media coverage. We think that that's largely untrue. Why? Because there are incentives built into the system of uncovering these bad things that these people do. Firstly, look at your notes. Mukhtar already explained to you why richer people get coverage, because it's very interesting to break a story about rich person doing something bad. It's something that a lot of people read. It's something more likely to happen to rich people. But even if that's not true, at the point in which they go into the political ring and they want to compete with someone, there are political competitors. Like if you're a Republican, CNN and New York Times and MSNBC will go after. If you're a Democrat, Fox News will go after. There are incentives built into the system of uncovering these problematic things about them, to spin them and to show how wrong they are. This means that voters in the end get that information. That information gets to them, yes, maybe in a way that somehow that somehow represents the view of the powerful. But to the extent to which that's likely to happen on both sides, we think that it's very likely that some people get that information about identity, which is going to be crucial to their vote. So their outpoint stance, opening government, is out of this. So let's talk about minorities. Very important part of this. There is evidence to suggest that black turnout was extremely high for Barack Obama, but wasn't, especially for swing state, but it wasn't that strong for Hillary Clinton, even though Clinton's policies on issues of race were comparable. Why is that true? And here is the response to Buttigieg because Obama energized a lot of disadvantaged populations that are less likely to turn out in the first place. Why? Because there are populations with existing distrust in the system, because they have barriers in the counterfactual to vote. On their side of the house, the disadvantaged population have worse access to information to talk about policy records. They have less time to talk about policies, whether or not this economic policy or that economic policy benefits them. So look, on our side, there is discourse and things like, look, there is a black guy that we can get elected that actually represents us. And this kind of energy to energize this population can only happen at the point in which pundits scream on both sides of the house to talk about this identity. We can get our first black president elected. We can get our first gay president elected. We can get a woman elected in the United States that gives the energy on their side of the house. Opening government here claims, but look, a lot of people hate gay people, therefore they don't vote for Buttigieg. Therefore, so look, the comparative is not that you have racist, etc. The comparative is that on your side of the house, there are still advantaged population can get on the ballot because they have better advantages built within the system. The question is, how can we get out of there? And the only mechanism that does that is through identity politics, and we're very proud for that. Closing, I'll take.
How good was Obama actually for the black community in America?
So if your claim is going to be that people are irrational and they are going to vote irrationally, that is going to have to compare to our claim. What is our claim? We say that there are parts of your identity that influence specifically the way how you outlook at the world. If you're a black person, your experiences with police and your experiences with racism and discrimination allow you to shape how seriously you take certain things. Yes, it's not probably going to be perfect. And if you are from a richer black neighborhood, maybe you don't understand them as much. But those are also things that are going to be spent out. We posit, and that's a very reasonable claim, that compared to people that don't occupy these identities, the way how seriously people take this policy is going to be important. Given that you can renege on policy, given that you can renege on your promises, given that you can renege on your record, the only thing that remains constant is the part of your identity that determines and influences how you look at the world. Compared to that, it's actually so so compared to closing government's potential case here, that for example, it's actually would be better if there was a white dude who had a better policy stance. We say first, on the comparative, you might have not gotten black people to vote for that person in the comparative where there is no focus on identity. And secondly, this is just less likely to happen given that identity occupies such a significant role. Given these two claims, firstly, that people are better represented when they focus on identity and private actions of people. Secondly, how it benefits disadvantaged population. We're very proud to oppose.
Cool. I would like to thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for his speech. I would now like to invite the Member of Government to deliver her speech. Here.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Great. Our case is not going to be that Obama was a horrible president and a white dude would have been better. Our case is going to be that due to this identity politics and due to this glorification because of you as a person, we are hiding over a lot of facts and therefore has less political discourse if it is all about whether the fact that Obama was black and not the policies that he actually created, which were not that great as it sounds, although we all believe that Obama was a great dude. First of all, a little bit of rebuttal. I want to note the one thing is that if a person is so problematic in their personal life, it is going to be showing in the policy that they are going to be creating. So if you are a raging, horrible racist, your policies are very likely going to be horribly racist. So we believe that all of this impact that opening the opposition wants to bring us, that you're going to be making better politics if you are a better person. Yes, then it will show in your politics. If you're a horrible person, then it will show in your politics, as it has with Donald Trump. It has shown that he is racist and doesn't care about white people, about poor people. So it doesn't really need to be about the personal identity in this. Second of all, we also believe that this is already principally regrettable, that if it is not equal for everybody, this should not be an indicator. We only want indicators which happen are equally on everybody. Therefore, opening opposition case already falls. And third of all, records on policy states. Why was opening opposition able to give us the example under how Joe Biden voted because his record stayed there. Like, this is one of the important facts. Like, how you voted is going to be staying the same, and then somehow record, even if you decide to be voting differently, your past record is always going to be there. So it is very much objective how you voted in the past, and very much also the things that showed outcome. Now, on to our point about how this excuses some bad policy. And this is important to know. Like, on our case, doesn't depend on whether or not this person is problematic or not. This is also dependent on people who generally are decent guys, which is why I'm going to be probably using Obama quite a lot as an example, because very many other politicians currently in place are not good people. So several reasons on why this is not good. Number one, justify actions through the characters. So if this person is a good guy, a lot of the things that they are doing and that they will be justified with, they are a great guy, or will be justified with, well, they tried their best, or they wanted to be doing the right thing. And this is incredibly problematic, given that in the end it is the outcome which saves people. Good intentions are not actually changing things within the situation, and this also limits the discussion to the degree that suddenly everything gets justified with, well, at least they tried very well. But second of all, and this is especially important, is that this justification of character does not work on everybody. The standards here are incredibly different, and this is important to note, where social biases always are in. If a woman sleeps around, she's a slut. If a man sleeps around, he is just like gigolo and amazing for be doing this. And these are things which are happening the same way. Trump got away with having three wives because he's a white man. A woman would not be getting away with these. And this is important to know. This is not only about media frame things, but about how society sees things. AOC is seen as a slut because she was a bartender beforehand. A man who would have worked as a bartender would have been seen as a man of the people, somebody who has done this. So this is important to note here, that this justification of actions is going to be seen very differently dependent on the person who is there. Therefore, it is not only clouding the discussion, but it is also making it much harder for specific groups to ever get to this point, making it easier for easily excuse people and much harder to this. So we can't have this because people are so biased. Second reasons of why this is excusing bad thing, it is derailing discussion. How? Number one, the love of the person. Because an attack on the policy of this person always directly becomes an attack on the person. So this huge focus on the person always makes it personal within the situation. And we do not believe that the majority of people voted for Trump because they loved his policy, but they voted on Trump because they loved Trump as a person. And this is very important to know. All of the discussion which is happening online about Trump with people who are Trump supporters is not about like how amazing his policy was, but about how they just hate Trump and hate what Trump is doing. So it makes it incredibly hard to be having discussion with both of these sides, because they're defending the person much more than they're ever defending the policy. And why does it matter more that we are talking about the policy and not on the person? Quite easily, in the end, the policy is changing the life, and in the end, the policy is what is being implemented, and we're just moving away from it. But second of all, under this derailing or under this love of the person, is that you also accept a lot of things of what they are doing. We see that poor people are okay with the rich paying less taxes because they believe Trump does it within the things. The same way around, the focus on Obama as being African and Muslim and probably a terrorist, which was the focus all on his character, also created the fact that all of the things that he did positively was not seen as positive because he's a terrorist within these situations. So this love or the hate to one person completely clouds the discussion which happens around this. But second of all, it is a huge level of distraction within this. So if it is very often this is seen as something that if your opponent is somebody who has like a problematic past, and I say this really in a lot of points, like for example Obama's birth certificate. This focus on policies was a very easy tactic of Fox News and the Republicans to be moving away from what Obama actually does and focus on this. And it is like a very easy smokescreen to show out people. And this is where the biases are again important, because this smokescreen and this tactic is not this much used on the already powerful and already privileged people. So we are not actually having this. But on the other way, on the positive, or on the side, we see that Obama is very often used as a tokenistic character within this. Why are the black people complaining they had a black president? So these personal identities of these different people are suddenly seen as something that excuse other behavior. Why are women complaining so much? AOC is in the Senate. Like, a lot of these things are happening that only because you are this, and because of the tokenistic idea that you are within this, and again, clouds out the discussion. But third of all, it becomes much more of a focus on the reasons that it is. Again, outcome matters. But it often is all on the person. So very often you can't even get to the aim, because the person has consistently needs to defend themselves for the reasons. We do believe that Obama, if he would not have consistently have to defend that he is not in fact a Muslim, would have done more. We believe that Bill Clinton could have done more if he wasn't impeached for a blowjob in the Oval Office. So in order to make discussion on policy and not on people, we beg you to propose.
All right, cool. I would like to thank the member of government for her speech. I would now like to invite the member of the opposition to deliver his speech. Hear, hear.
Audible?
Yeah.
Cool. 3, 2, 1. I genuinely find about 2/3 of the debate so far completely irrelevant. This is not a debate about visible identities, because the comparative is not Barack Obama giving speeches with a paper bag over his head. So to that extent that he is visibly black, everything you heard about that type of identity is completely irrelevant, because the debate is about the focus on personal identity, and things that are visible on camera are always going to be noticed by voters. I don't know if it matters that much whether it was Fox deliberately talking about his potentially Muslim roots, or the fact that CNN anchors routinely messed up and mispronounced his surname as Osama. The second thing is, I don't think anything in this debate pertaining to your political record is remotely relevant, because again, the debate is about the private actions. Everything that you've done in your past in politics, whether you switched parties multiple times or voted for dodgy bills in the past, is still a focus on policy. So what is this debate actually about? Two things we're going to explain to you in extension. The first is the principle of representative democracy, and we're going to give you 4 reasons why we think that personality politics better fulfills that ideal, and also why that ideal is preferable. Secondly, then we're going to give you the real comparative of what policy-focused politics actually looks like, and it's not nearly as good as the government bench want you to believe. First argument then on representative democracy. I think that it is false that we ought to vote for policy, and here's why. Ideological flexibility, the willingness to change your policy platform when you're in office and faced with the realities, when civil servants come to you with data, when scientists advise you that the policy that you constructed while you were in opposition is completely impractical, whether on economic, scientific, or a variety of other grounds, right? I think flip-flopping is just a negative sounding way of saying changing your mind in the face of evidence. To the extent then that a focus on policy means voters hold politicians accountable on the basis of how much of that policy they implemented faithfully according to their platform, I think that produces negative outcomes. I'd prefer if policy was flexible. I think therefore the focus on that and the rigidity that comes is a negative. Secondly, I think personality is a signifier of your ideological conviction and your preferences. Notice that the POI that I gave to opening government and the response was extremely revealing, because if the metric for this debate was purely what policy does this politician stand for, then the answer to my question of all things being equal but one of them being have committed sexual assault, the only correct answer would have been you flip a coin, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is their policy platform. But the reason why it does matter, and the reason why the PM gave that answer, is because someone's having committed sexual assault in the past is a clear signifier that they do not respect the moral integrity, the dignity of other people, right? That they think other people are means to an end, that they can use them to achieve personal gratification. And that is going to inform how they make policy decisions, because when you are faced with a policy in which there are 2 branches and the way to decide between them is not one that can be decided through quantitative metrics, but is instead an ideological preference, the personality of the person making that choice is a very good way of gauging which of the 2 paths they will choose, which particular segment of the population they're more likely to throw under the bus, who it is they're most likely to fuck over. And this is important, right? Let's engage directly with opening government on this, right? Because they say, well, some people can hide it, some people can conceal their past or present themselves to be something else. But note the operative word there, some people. I'm going to bite the bullet and say, yes, fair enough. Personality is not going to be a perfect gauge of politicians' integrity. Some will fall through the cracks. Some politicians will fool the electorate. But it's a numbers game. Because if on net good, what we're doing is measuring people's integrity, measuring people's honesty, and gauging how it is that they're likely to act in office, I would prefer if, you know, on a comparative, 75% of the politicians in parliament or whatever genuinely have integrity, genuinely are civil servants, genuinely committed to like doing the best for their citizens. Maybe, yeah, 25% of them, 10% of them, whatever it is, are shitbags who are just there to enrich themselves and fool the electorate. But at least the other 75% there are now there to hold them to account. We want a critical mass of honest politicians. That's best achieved on our side when we're actually examining their private actions and what they did and how that lines up with what they are now saying, and that tells us something about their honesty. It goes further though, and this is really important, right? Because the private actions of an individual not just tell you about their ideological preferences, they tell you to whom that person really owes allegiance. They tell you who has leverage over that person. They tell you who has influence over that person. They tell you which parties they went to, which people were whispering in their ears, which people have dirt on them and can use that in office. The reason why the Russian scandal with Trump was so important was not because people, I mean, there was a variety of reasons it was important, right? But the reason it should have been the most troubling is because the question that everyone should have asked in their back of their minds is, which decisions will Trump shy away from because he knows that the Russians now have dirt on him? Which decisions can he no longer make, right? I think the last component then, moving on to the fourth section here, I don't know if I flagged these properly, but whatever. The last thing is that representation, the principle of representative democracy, of electing representatives and not direct democracy, because otherwise we would just like have a checkbox of policies that we want to vote for, right? Is that politics makes people feel something. Reagan and Thatcher are partially remembered for their policy, but they're also remembered for how they made people feel. Reagan's go-get-em attitude, regardless of his actual policies, genuinely inspired people. It made them want to start businesses. It made them want to invest. It made them want to join the government and the intelligence forces to combat the threat of the USSR. And I want you to shelve your liberal bias, right? Because we may not particularly care if politicians slept around or done drugs or was a Marxist in their youth, but there is no objective truth, and all the views of the electorate on those issues are equally valid to yours. And I think this goes further in one last regard, but before I do, opening government, engage with the way up I gave ideally, or whatever it is.
Even if everything you say would be true, it would be more revealing for a certain class of people than others. When you stand on a debate stage, even if it's not a perfect cause of policy, at least you're not at an inherent advantage for having a rich past.
Cool. I already, as I said, it was a numbers game. I weighed it up. Yes, we'll fail in 10% of cases. We'll win in the other 90%. It's fine. Let's move on. The last thing that I want to talk about is how it goes further, right? Because the cooperation of people with policy is connected to how much people trust politicians. Trudeau and Jacinda Ardern's pandemic responses were not like the best in the world, but it was the fact that people cooperated with them because they trusted them and they knew them as people. Lastly then, what is the actual comparative on policy? Because OG say it's like rich people and OO say, okay, well, rich people can run more ads, but you can run ads on policy or personality. So I don't think that's really relevant, right? The thing that is relevant is how policy gets crafted in two regards. One, it's the people who have money to fund think tanks to research their policy for them. And two, it's when you can carry out extensive market research and run focus groups on what type of policy is going to cut through to the electorate. But let's talk about what this actually looks like, because the singular policy focus on policy is not going to create like detailed nuanced policy. It's going to create populism, simple solutions to complex problems, the shit that cuts through to the people who don't understand politics, as opening opposition tells you. But the consequence of this, and if you combine it with what I said earlier, is now politicians can't be flexible and they're bound to shitty populist platforms which cut through the messaging most effectively at the point, and that's what people are evaluating their politicians on, instead of the integrity, instead of who they're accountable to, and instead of how much they trust them or align with their ideological preferences. I think personality-driven politics better fulfills the ideal of representative democracy. I think it allows flexibility in politics. I've lost my window, so I can't close my speech. Ah, here we go. Cool. Thanks.
Cool. I would like to thank the member of the opposition for his speech. I would now like to invite the government whip to deliver her speech. Here.
Okay, before I start, 1 second, because I need to switch to a different network, because okay, am I audible?
Yes, everything's working now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to start with some responses to closing opposition, even though they barely responded to us and apparently also barely listened to our case. I really hope they give us a POI in the next speech so we can, have some engagement. But basically what they tell us is like, but sometimes you need to change on policy, and this is now bad as a focus. So we don't really understand why it's necessarily a good mark of a politician to need to change their policy. If what you constructed in opposition is such an unworkable policy, maybe you shouldn't be in office. Maybe you should be evaluated on that, because we do think most professional politicians probably have enough access to advisors and resources also in opposition. And if they're now more held more accountable to that, that probably makes the discourse better and more polarized by actually focusing on having reasonable ideas that you would stand behind also later on. Second point that they give us is but it it might signify bad morals. We think please respond to what Helena already said there when she says that this will also show in your voting record. If you're a bad person, you're likely to also have these policies beforehand. You're unlikely to be in a very powerful political position without having some open track record. So we think in most cases, before you get elected to a really powerful office, you've done something at lower level, which is on the public record, where you would also see these bad morals if they really shine through in your policy. So we just don't think this stands. And I think also the only way where they really show us that this is a bad moral inherently is if it's about assault. But we think that this debate also contains a lot of cases of just policing someone under identity, of having an unconventional family life, of being not married, being in their third marriage, being gay or whatever, none of which signifies bad morals, but probably is going to harm them. And as we bring you in your case, are going to harm them way more disproportionately and way worse. We think the fact that Kavanaugh, who actually commits sexual assault, gets through, the fact that Biden also still gets to be the nominee, etc., signifies that if you're a privileged white man, even if you're an assaulter, you get through with this. What we're telling you is that this is incredibly unequal in the case that women and minorities, for way smaller things that are not actually bad, are likely to be criticized or become unelectable. Hillary Clinton was criticized way more harshly for her husband's digressions than he ever was. We think this crucially leads to very unequal access to representation. This means that we don't get diverse politicians elected because we apply this metric so unequally. And we think this is an actually way more important principle, that we have diverse representation, that we have women, people of color, gay people, people with unconventional lives in office, and not just white men who probably still get away with worse stuff. So next thing they bring us is this idea of trust and cooperation. So again, please respond to our case, because we've already told you that you're way more likely to cooperate and trust on the wrong metric. I don't know very much about my chancellor's personal life, but I trust her based on her policy output. In Germany, it's more that the government has a good output. I don't care what their personal life is. I don't understand why this is a good metric. Helena brings you that this is actually a bad metric, where you're likely to trust and cooperate in the wrong cases, and also not trust and cooperate in the wrong cases, where we actually show you this whole idea of polarization and how this actually works out, because you now buy into someone because you personally they're appealing to you, so you're willing to uncritically follow them when you shouldn't, when they actually go against their own constituencies, when Barack Obama actually does something that's not good for Black people, and conversely not be willing to listen to them based on their policy track record because you really, really don't like them personally. We think this is bad. Then same rebuttal basically goes for closing opposition's idea of you're more engaged. We think, again, you're more engaged on the wrong stuff. Yeah, I think that covers this. Yeah, so we think that this mainly just leads to this idea of being able to justify the wrong things through your character, excusing somebody's intentions because you just trust them and you think they're nice. You are more likely to also use your hate on that. We think we already on what we show you, take it over our opening on the ideas that we actually explain you a more reasonable metric on why this comes out unfairly. We think they mainly impacted on this idea of if you're rich and privileged, you can distract. We think our metric on how this is perceived and how other people interact with this is more inherent to the focus. It's more inherent to the idea that you are like just being harmed by this because it applies to more of the cases. We also think it applies to the more relevant cases. Probably politicians, and there we agree with closing opposition, are still able to like outframe this if they're rich and privileged, also if we use other metrics. But we think that this metric specifically is the worst one compared to them because it's the most unequal. It's the most unequal where you can't defend yourself because you're a woman, because you're gay, because you're of a different race. We think if it's your policy track record, that is more equal for all politicians because it's objectively recorded and something where you're likely to have the same voting patterns as all of the other politicians around you. So it's something where you can be more equally compared rather than like somebody's felt perception, which is just incredibly biased and unfair. Note that this leads to bad representation. Note that this leads to bad policy because it can just be justified, like opening opposition, a POI.
Okay, at your best, the tokenism and smokescreens carry the discussion to both enable the disadvantaged and disable them. At our side, giving people the predictor is actually an important benefit.
Okay, so let's respond to opening opposition's idea of minorities. We think they are minorities. By definition, they are not able to vote on this themselves. If like only the minority votes for someone, they don't get elected. We think that like this also is like, you see that with the black vote in America right now still going to Biden and not to Kamala Harris or something, because they note that they like need to go to someone on policy record because they can't go just by being a minority. We also think that minority politicians are less likely to be able to do this stuff, which at least mitigates this point, because even if they have better experiences opening opposition claim, they like also need to appeal to the rest of society to still be elected. They can't be seen as someone who only acts for them. Barack Obama can't be seen as someone who's only for black people, because that will not get him re-elected, and this will just make him attacked more than like a white politician who's more free to be in favor of the minorities too. So we don't understand why experience necessarily makes them more able to help them. And again, we don't think that minorities alone can elect them. So this is not equal. Our point is something that like way more shows you how this is unequal and actually harming them than going by any other metric.
All right, I would like to thank the government whip for her speech, and would now like to invite the opposition whip to wrap up the debate. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Cool. I think we can all agree that politics in general is pretty bad. It is toxic to some extent because there is an asymmetry of power between the rich and also the commoners who can't access politics. The issue with the gov bench is people are often used to white male leaders when people can't compete on them on the grounds of moral integrity. Those powerful people win by default, even ignoring the advantages money gives in crafting policy platforms that appeal to voters, which is the analysis that Ron has given you and that was unresponded to. 2 points of clashes in this debate: whether good-hearted politician can access politics. Secondly, whether this hinders political discourse at all. OG's claim on the first clash is to say, a clean track record is not accessible by individuals from poor socioeconomic backgrounds, and you let the problematic rich white men run away. 3 responses to this. Firstly, a premise challenge. We say that individuals coming from rich backgrounds are also susceptible to media scrutiny. They go to parties because from the point of their birth, they're probably known by the media and their personal actions are in the spotlight. And also cross-reference this to, if you read your notes carefully, they only said some people can hide it. But secondly, if anything, I think the undercurrent of politics currently now indicate there is more suspicion of rich politicians, which means, people in general would still cast some sort of doubts if they get into power through connections or actions assessed by meritocratic actions. But I think the final critical response to that case is to say it is uncomparative, because the presumption of the cases of people of humble roots would not have been able to access politics and build up their profile. I think this is false, because poor individuals in reality access this particular politics because they are able to differentiate themselves in an arena dominated by rich politicians. And the important way of achieving that is to demonstrate they are of a humble root. And even alternatively, with their example about Buttigieg, I think, we all accept he's probably a politician of goodwill. The way he constructed an identity is for him to be seen as educationally privileged, but as a person who also had experience in the military to understand the common touch. That is how competition of identity, positive competition of identity, we envision to be working. I think secondly, rich people comparatively worsens politics in an unaccountable way when there's no focus on personal identity. I think OO utilized OG's analysis to say, rich people can have resourcefully to conduct ads. I think our response is much more in depth to that, because we say rich politicians can now gang up in their own clique to run snazzy PR campaigns and characterize themselves as useful with a series of unproven policy package. And they can literally say, aha, I've got a team of experts or think tanks which are probably hired by the DAX connection and say they're competent politician. That is the point at which voters cannot make reference to the humane side of politicians to evaluate the decision-making capabilities, and they cannot be held accountable for their personal integrity. Policy discussion at the end of the day intensifies and become a competition of peer populism. Even accepting OG's best case scenario, that is comparatively, we say, there more polarization than like personality issues, because the discussion of policies is definite and is indefinite, and it ranges from a vast array of policy areas, and people can literally extremize every single policy area, whereas identity is rather limited, because there are only a finite amount of traits which stick in people's head. The logical conclusion of OG's case is that they've given you given the basis of the case's spell. I think the eventual impacts of collapse as well. Compare that to the impact we've brought you. We said that personality politics means you always have to demonstrate you understand common touch. You have to be consistent, because politicians now in our world fear being called out on the grounds on shaky personality grounds. So yes, the trade-off is 10% can still hack the system by lying and cheating, but the crushing allegation that you're an immoral person always shields and deters politicians from doing the worst sort of crimes. And even if you don't buy that, we say the propensity that you get some cooperation and attention for our policy from the general population just increases, because intuitively, I'm just more likely to listen to a charismatic politician talking about a coronavirus policy than a technocrat giving a 15-minute lecture on TV. We have proven that that is a conduit for enfranchisement. We win on that particular clash. Secondly, in terms of political discourse, the first claim coming from CJ is to say identity politics justify heinous crimes. The first response to that is unresponsive, comparative to our characterization, when we told you rich people hold the narrative of power regardless, and it's even worse when they do so to justify policies. Secondly, I don't understand why this narrative on the side is particularly harmful and details accountability mechanism. Look, they relied a lot on the Trump example, so let's go with that. I think the very fact that Trump hating sentiment, bring about policy discussion is a key win on the side of the house. And secondly, if you go to moderate votes in the States, and the powerful message to convince them not to vote for Trump is to say, look, he's quite bad in the way he dismissed these sexual allegations, and how he's angry and unreasonable in how he acts in press conferences, rather than in their world. It's just a literal dispassionate attack of saying, oh, Trump is allowing immigrants, which harms the GDP of the United States of America by 2.5%. I think our side convincingly pulls voters to call out these politicians at the end of the day. And here's our extension comes in, right? Because comparatively, we've shown you political discussion and political decision-making enhances on our side of the house by three ways. The first is to say we measure people's integrity in the long run, so we are more able to scrutinize the consistency within politics and how they treat others. Secondly, we've told you we're more able to call out leverages and influences, because the accountability mechanism of integrity and trust is the easiest point of reference. The common threshold means you're likely to tie individuals to call them out immediately, because they do not, because voters themselves will not be wanted to be seen as a moral hypocrites. That is the point at which they do not want to be morally consistent personally, and their psychological reference means they're more likely to challenge politicians. Contrast that with the policy justification they have, because they can literally say, Russian influence is fine because economically it makes America great again. But finally, I think this was just also unresponded to and mischaracterized by opposition, because we said the flexibility of adopting to societal needs is important. If you wrote your policy platform a year ago, which is unsuitable for like a post-corona era, it's much better that you can flip-flop and change with circumstance. When voters don't gauge with that because of the purely ideological purity on the side of the house and focusing on peer party lines, you blur those policy discussions. Finally, in terms of social biases, I think it is symmetrical on both sides of the house, when I think on our side of the house, at least Obama can say he is proud of that, his blackness. Clinton can say and shift the narrative of like women is capable in politics. That is how you shot the Overton window, because you cannot and you no longer can dismiss identity in the public political platform, but also I just think societal biases of expectation of competence, in fields such as diplomacy, economics, it's literally the same sort of privilege rich people dominate. So finally comparing ourselves to open opposition, I think we beat them in 3 ways. Firstly, we're the first team that provided a plausible comparative of what engagement policies actually look like when it harms democracy. We accept it. Integrity is not a silver bullet, but at least it enables honesty as a principal consideration in public forum. Secondly, I think impact of Ode's framing is fairly trivial because minority politics are already visible, and our framing of the debate beats it because politics in the long run is better. We've also dealt with OG's core concern of analyzing the positive reasons of individuals of humble roots getting into politics, which also won on OG's metric, and on consideration and engagement, we've beaten O far better than, yeah, cool.
All right, cool. I would like to thank everyone for this lovely debate.